Hello everyone and welcome back to Crawlsets Gaming. Today we're going to take a look at Lightfall. This engaging 2D platformer promises an innovative approach to platforming, wonderful graphics and an interesting story. Whether it can deliver on this promise is the question we will try to answer today. Lightfall is available on Steam for €14.99 with your regional equivalent. I've always considered platformers not really to be my favorite genre. Well, in the past I did. But then I fall in love with Hollow Knight. Then Cuphead and Celeste came and only cemented my newfound love for great platformers. So let's take a look at one that is claiming to take an innovative approach to platforming and see whether it holds up to these platforming gems. And as always, we will begin with the most important thing for every single game, the gameplay. And let me be straight, the gameplay of Lightfall is amazing. Really, it's one of the best platformers I've ever played, and as I already mentioned, I've played some really good platformers last year. Lightfall gets the praise from me because of its main mechanic, the ability to create your own platforms. This relatively simple looking mechanic allows you to pick and choose your own way throughout the levels, something that is very hard to do in a platformer, and I just love it. It creates the feeling of almost playing an open world platformer compared to your more traditional approach. So, how exactly can you create platforms for yourself? Actually, in a few different ways. The one you will use the most just creates a platform right under you and you can jump off it. Obviously, you can't just create an infinite amount of platforms, otherwise the game would be a complete joke and super easy to finish. So, here you have the ability to create 4 platforms in a row. If you do create 4, you will expend your resources and will have to regain power by standing on solid ground. This limits the amount of ground you can cover and the height you reach with your own platforms. The second way you can create platforms is as movable blocks. These mostly get used to block lasers that would otherwise kill you on contact. But they are also sometimes used as a sort of engines in a machine. Well, you put them in and you can rotate them, opening new paths for you. This use is limited to a single block and has a timer attached to it, but not before the block disappears, but before it is no longer movable. The third way you make blocks is sort of similar to the first way you create blocks. It shares the same limit of 4 blocks created, but instead of the block being created under you, you create them in front of you. This allows you to use them as sort of a ladder because you also have the ability to jump off of walls. And if used correctly, in combination with the platforms that are already existing in the world, you can climb incredibly fast. This way also has another use, as if you create the block in front of you and continue holding the button that created it, it will also continue to follow alongside with you. And the last way you use your power is as a weapon. You can throw the block in a straight line in front of you, destroying obstacles and enemies, making a path for yourself or clearing the way respectively. Apart from this very unique mechanic of being able to create platforms for yourself, Lightfall is your pretty typical platformer with all the things you'd expect, like platforms that only last for a short period of time until they disappear, the ability to hold on to walls and jump off of them, enemies that block your path and either need to be avoided or destroyed. You know, all the stuff that's been in platformers almost since they were first introduced as a genre. The last thing that I loved about Lightfall that I want to talk about is the fact that it is often offering you several different routes to finish the level. Giving you options is something I feel is almost always a good thing, and it only heightens the feeling of almost playing an open world platformer. But not everything is fine and dandy in Lightfall. There were a few things I didn't like when it came to the gameplay, but you can probably guess from my enthusiasm at the beginning that they weren't a big deal. But let's talk about them anyway. In terms of the gameplay, I only really had 2 issues. The first and the less irritating one is somewhat an inconsistent approach to difficulty. By this, I mean the fact that the vast majority of each level is pretty easy, to be completely honest. But then you get to a segment that just ramps up the difficulty by an insane amount, and you spend like 20 minutes just going through that one single segment to go back to pretty easy gameplay once you pass it. The second, and honestly more irritating problem, is the fact that the movement of your character can sometimes feel a bit sluggish. But only when moving at low speeds. Once you reach a high speed, the control you have over him is great. But there are parts of the levels where you need to move slowly because you need to avoid things. On the other hand, I can definitely see this being intended by the devs, as the game has a pretty big focus on speedrunning, so moving slow is disincentivized even by how sluggish it does feel. And since I just mentioned speedrunning, let's talk about that for a moment. Apart from the story mode, which I definitely recommend you tackle first, Lightfall also has a dedicated speedrun mode. Here, the point isn't just to finish the level, but to finish it as quickly as possible. Obviously. You get a stopwatch measuring your time, a ghost of your previous best time, and even an option to see ghosts of other people, giving the game sort of a multiplayer component, but only a small one. So, a little mid-conclusion about the gameplay. It is really good. It has its flaws, especially when you're not aiming to finish the levels as quickly as possible, but the game in general is just great. The block creation mechanic is great, the almost open world feels just amazing, and once you get used to the inertia of your character, the platforming itself feels insanely rewarding. I believe that was enough about the gameplay, and it is time to talk about another aspect of Lightfall: the graphics. Lightfall uses one key feature to create nice graphics: contrast. Whether it is the contrast of color or contrast of light and darkness, and I'll be honest, I did like that. Quite a lot. I don't really have anything to complain about when it comes to them, but I do feel like you guys can create your own impression from the video footage or the pictures itself. Another, surprisingly large, part of Lightfall is the story. And here I do actually have a few problems. First of all, I do think there is a bit too much of it. The game presents the story in two ways. First, there is the narrator, your companion, Strix, an owl, the last living member of an order of protectors of the realm. And he just keeps on going and going with exposition. A few times I honestly managed to beat the level before his dialogue ended. That just seems ridiculous. And when it comes to him, I have one more issue: his voice. It just doesn't fit with the theme at all. He is supposed to be an old, grumpy companion, but he sounds so positive all the time. It just doesn't work. I'll be honest, he sounds like a cheery gnome. And as my girlfriend pointed out when I asked her what she thinks of his voice, he sounds almost exactly like King Boomy from Avatar: The Last Airbender. Almost exactly the same. And Boomy was a crazy but optimistic guy, not a serious old grumpy person. Then there is the second way the story is presented to you, and that is by collecting these golden crystals that are usually hidden in some corner of the map and are supposed to be incentivizing you to explore the map to its full extent. And that part is actually fine, but the amount of text in them is just freaking ridiculous. When I came on the very first one, I thought to myself, okay, I'll bite, I'll read it. It took me several minutes to read it. That's just too much. And I think I would be more okay with it if the game started with little tidbits of lore and you were going through it and it would just expand in length. But it starts with several paragraphs of text. Don't do that. But on the other hand, if you want, you can just ignore these. Both of them. You can just mute the voiceover and never search for text lore. But I do think the lore is actually somewhat cool. Thus, my personal suggestion would be to listen to the narrator, even though his voice doesn't fit the theme, and collect the lore and read it once you finish the game, and only if you found yourself being interested in it. Then we have the last atmosphere building tool, the music, about which I can't really say much. Not because it's bad, but also not because it's particularly outstanding. It's just normal. On top of that, it gets quickly overshadowed by the voiceover, taking your audio attention away from the music to the voiceover, making it not really important. Last of all, there is the performance. And here, everything worked well. I did at first experience a few frame drops, but then I found those weren't caused by the game, but by my computer deciding to go through virus scan at the time I didn't expect it to, and once I disabled the virus scan, it worked flawlessly. So, in conclusion, Lightfall is a great innovative platformer. If you have even the slightest liking towards platformers, I highly urge you to take a look at it. The platforming is just great in it. The game does have its flaws, but mostly they are centered around the way the story is presented to you, and if you play games purely for the gameplay, you can just ignore that completely. Thus, Lightfall gets a definite recommendation from me. So, that's it for today, guys. Hope you liked the review, and if you did, please consider giving us a thumbs up here on YouTube and subscribing to the channel. And comment if you had something you would like to add. See you guys later with more gaming content.